I trusted you with my heart, and you stole my life savings instead, Grace whispered, her voice shaking as she stared at the man she thought she loved. The police sirens grew louder in the distance, and David's confident smile finally cracked. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. 3 months earlier, Grace Morrison had been sitting in her quiet kitchen, stirring her morning coffee and wondering if this was all there was left. At 74, she'd been a widow for 3 years, and the silence in her 2-bedroom house sometimes felt overwhelming. Her daughter Jennifer called regularly. Her grandchildren visited when they could, but the evenings stretched long and lonely. Maybe it's time I tried something new, Grace murmured to herself, glancing at the laptop Jennifer had bought her for Christmas. She'd been resistant to technology for years, but lately she'd been teaching herself to navigate the internet. Jennifer had mentioned online communities for people her age, places where she might make friends. That afternoon, Grace found herself browsing a dating website called Silva Connections. She'd created a profile weeks ago but never had the courage to upload a photo or respond to messages. Today felt different. She selected a recent photo from Jennifer's wedding. She looked elegant in her navy dress, her silver hair styled perfectly. Within hours of updating her profile, Grace received a message that made her heart flutter. Dear Grace, your smile caught my attention immediately. I'm David, and I'd love to get to know the woman behind those kind eyes. I'm a widower myself, and I understand how precious genuine connection can be at our stage of life. Grace read the message 3 times. Before responding, David's profile showed a distinguished man in his 70s with salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes. He described himself as a retired engineer who loved traveling, classical music, and quiet dinners. Most importantly, he was looking for companionship and understanding. Their first phone conversation lasted 2 hours. David's voice was gentle and cultured, with a slight accent that he explained came from his childhood in England. He spoke lovingly of his late wife Margaret, who had passed away 4 years ago after a battle with cancer. I never thought I'd want to open my heart again, David confided. But loneliness has a way of changing your perspective, doesn't it? Grace found herself nodding along, feeling understood in a way she hadn't experienced since her husband Robert's death. I know exactly what you mean. Some days I catch myself setting 2 cups for coffee out of habit. Over the following weeks, their daily phone calls became the highlight of Grace's day. David seemed genuinely interested in her life, her years. As a high school English teacher, her love of gardening, her pride in her daughter Jennifer's success as a nurse practitioner, he shared stories of his engineering projects, his travels across Europe for work, and his current consulting business that kept him traveling frequently. I wish I could see you in person, David said during one of their evening calls. Unfortunately, I'm committed to a 6-month consulting project in Dubai. The pay is too good to pass up at my age, but it means I'm stuck here until December. Grace felt a pang of disappointment but admired his work ethic. That must be exciting working internationally. At 73, it has its moments, but mostly I miss home. I miss having someone to talk to face, someone who understands what it's like to start over in your 70s. Their relationship deepened through hours of conversation. David sent her photos of Dubai's skyline and told her about the project he was overseeing, the construction of a luxury hotel. Grace shared pictures of her garden and stories about her grandchildren. She found herself looking forward to his calls with an eagerness she hadn't felt in years. Jennifer noticed the change in her mother immediately during their weekly lunch at their favorite cafe. You seem different, Mom. Happier, Jennifer observed, watching Grace check her phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Grace blushed slightly. I've been talking to someone, a man I met online. Jennifer's eyebrows raised. Online, Mom, that's wonderful. Tell me about him. Grace described David enthusiastically, his kindness, his intelligence, their shared experiences as widowed seniors. Jennifer listened with growing interest and a touch of protective concern. Have you video chatted with him, seen him in real time? Jennifer asked carefully. He doesn't have reliable internet where he's staying. We mostly talk on the phone, and he sends photos occasionally, Grace explained. He's very old-fashioned that way, which I find charming. Jennifer made a mental note to research online. Dating safety for seniors. While she was thrilled to see her mother happy, something about the situation felt off. Though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. 6 weeks into their relationship, David's tone began to shift during their calls. He sounded stressed, distracted. Darling, I'm facing an unexpected situation here, he said one evening, his voice heavy with worry. There's been a problem with the hotel project. A supplier is demanding immediate payment for materials, but there's been a banking error with my consulting fees. My money is tied up for another 2 weeks. Grace's heart went out to him. That sounds terrible. Is there anything I can do? I couldn't ask you to, David started, then paused. Actually, Grace, I hate to even mention this, but if I can't resolve this payment issue, I could lose the entire contract. It would mean losing nearly $100,000 in fees. How much do you need? Grace asked without hesitation. $5,000 would cover the immediate supplier payment. I would pay you back the moment my fees are released, plus interest. But Grace, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering, Grace interrupted. We care about each other, don't we? That means helping when times are tough. David's relief was palpable. You're an angel, Grace. I'll send you the wire transfer information for the supplier. This will save my entire project. Grace went to her bank the next morning and wired $5,000 to an account David provided. The transaction felt significant, not just financially, but emotionally. She was investing in their future together. But David's financial troubles seemed to multiply. 2 weeks later, he called in distress again. Grace, I'm mortified to have to tell you this, but there's been another complication. The local authorities are demanding an unexpected tax payment on the project. Without it, they'll shut down the construction, and I'll lose everything, including the money I was going to use to pay you back. This time, David needed $8,000. Grace hesitated for the first time. David, this is my savings. I need to be careful. Of course, darling, I completely understand. It's just that I'm so close to completing this project. Once it's finished, I'll have more than enough to pay you back and take you on that trip to Paris we've been planning. The mention of their dream trip, something they'd discussed extensively during their late-night calls, melted Grace's resistance. She made another wire transfer. Jennifer noticed her mother seemed anxious during their next lunch meeting. Is everything okay, Mom? You seem worried about something. Grace hesitated, then confided about David's financial difficulties and her decision to help him. Jennifer's fork clattered onto her plate. Mom, you wired money to someone you've never met in person? He's not just someone, Jennifer. I love him and he loves me. Sometimes you have to take risks for the people you care about. How much money are we talking about? Grace's voice became defensive. $13,000, and it's a loan, not a gift. He's going to pay me back with interest. Jennifer felt her stomach drop. $13,000 was a significant portion of her mother's savings. Mom, have you considered that this might be a scam? David is not a scammer. Grace snapped, surprising them both with her vehemence. He's a gentleman who's facing temporary difficulties. I won't let you poison something beautiful with your suspicions. Jennifer backed down, but her concern only grew. That afternoon, she began researching romance scams, targeting older adults. What she found made her blood run cold. Every element of her mother's relationship fit the classic pattern: the widowed overseas businessman, the financial emergencies, the requests for wire transfers, the reluctance to meet in person. Meanwhile, David's emergencies continued to escalate. A customs hold on his equipment required a $15,000 bond. A medical emergency, he claimed to have been hospitalized with a heart episode, required payment for private treatment since his insurance didn't cover overseas medical care. Each time, Grace found herself reaching deeper into her savings. She'd told David about her financial limits, but he assured her that this would be the last request, that he was days away from completing the project and returning home to her. I can't wait to hold you in my arms, David whispered during one of their late-night calls. After all you've done for me, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Grace had now sent $38,000, nearly 3/4 of her total savings. She'd even taken out a small loan against her house to help with David's most recent emergency. Jennifer's worry had transformed into determination. She couldn't stand by and watch her mother lose everything to what she was now certain was an elaborate scam. She decided to conduct her own investigation. Using the photos David had sent her mother, Jennifer ran reverse image searches online. Her heart sank as she discovered the truth. The photos of David were actually stock photos of a model named William, used on multiple dating sites by different scammers. The pictures of Dubai that David had claimed to take himself appeared on travel websites dating back several years. Jennifer also researched the phone number David used to call her mother. It was routed through an internet-based service that could mask the caller's real location. Far from being in Dubai, David could be calling from anywhere in the world. Armed with evidence, Jennifer faced the difficult task of confronting her mother without alienating her further. Mom, I need you to listen to me with an open mind, Jennifer said, arriving at Grace's house with a folder full of printouts. I've been researching David, and I've found some concerning information. Grace's face immediately hardened. Jennifer, I told you, please, just look at this, Jennifer interrupted, spreading the evidence across the kitchen table. These photos David sent you, they're stock photos. This man's name is William, and he's a model. These same pictures are being used by scammers on dozens of dating sites. Grace stared at the printouts, her face pale. There must be some mistake. Mom, David isn't who he says he is. He's a criminal who targets lonely people and tricks them into sending money. You're not his only victim." The evidence was overwhelming, but Grace's emotional investment ran too deep for immediate acceptance. Even if these photos are stolen, that doesn't mean David isn't real. Maybe he just used a fake photo because he was insecure about his appearance. Jennifer realized she needed more definitive proof. "Will you let me call him? Let me talk to David directly." Grace reluctantly agreed, dialing David's number and putting the call on speaker. "Hello, darling." David's familiar voice filled the kitchen. "You sound different today." "David, my daughter is here and she has some questions about your photos," Grace said carefully. There was a long pause. "Questions about my photos." Jennifer leaned toward the phone. "David, we've discovered that the photos you've been sending my mother are stolen images of a model named William. Can you explain that?" Another pause, longer this time. When David spoke again, his cultured accent seemed forced. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. Grace, perhaps we should talk privately." "No," Jennifer said firmly. "If you're legitimate, you can answer a simple question. What's the name of the hotel you're supposedly building in Dubai?" The Emirates Luxury Resort. Jennifer had prepared for this. She'd researched every major construction project in Dubai. There's no Emirates Luxury Resort being built in Dubai. I've checked with the Dubai Development Authority. The line went silent for nearly 30 seconds. When David spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The refined accent was gone, replaced by a younger, harsher tone. "Listen here, lady. Your mother and I have a relationship. You need to mind your own business," Grace gasped. The voice was completely different, younger, cruder, nothing like the gentleman she'd fallen in love with. "Grace, honey, are you there?" The voice continued, attempting to return to David's cultured tone, but failing completely. Grace's hand shook as she reached for the phone. "Who are you? Where's David?" "I am David, sweetie. I'm just stressed about your daughter's accusations," but the damage was done. Grace could hear the deception now, the way the voice shifted between characters. Jennifer gently took the phone from her mother's trembling hand. "The scam is over," Jennifer said into the phone. "We're reporting this to the police and the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. Good luck proving anything." The voice sneered before the line went dead. Grace collapsed into a chair, the full weight of her betrayal settling over her. $38,000, she whispered. "How could I have been so stupid?" Jennifer knelt beside her mother's chair. "You weren't stupid, Mom. You're trusting and loving, and someone took advantage of that. This isn't your fault." But Grace felt the shame burning through her chest. "I defended him to you. I chose him over your concerns." "What kind of mother does that make me?" "It makes you human," Jennifer said softly. "And it makes you someone who deserves justice." The next morning, Jennifer accompanied her mother to the police station to file a report. Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in financial crimes against seniors, listened to their story with professional sympathy. "Unfortunately, this is more common than people realize," Detective Santos explained. "Romance scams cost victims over $1 billion annually, and seniors are often targeted because they're perceived as having savings and being more trusting." "Is there any chance of getting the money back?" Grace asked quietly. "It's difficult," the detective admitted. "These scammers often operate from overseas and use sophisticated methods to hide their identities. But we'll investigate fully, and we'll coordinate with federal agencies who track these crimes." Detective Santos also suggested they continue communicating with the scammer to gather more evidence. "If he contacts you again, we'd like to set up a controlled operation. Sometimes we can trace these criminals if we can keep them engaged." That evening, David called again. Grace's caller ID showed his familiar number, but now she heard the deception in every word. "Grace, darling, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I was under enormous stress, and I said things I didn't mean. Your daughter caught me off guard with her accusations." Jennifer, who was listening on an extension under police guidance, motioned for her mother to keep him talking. "David, I need you to be honest with me," Grace said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Are you really in Dubai?" "Of course I am, sweetheart. Look, I know you have doubts now, but let me prove my love to you. I've just received my final payment. For the project, I'm booking a flight home tomorrow. We'll meet in person, and I'll bring your money, all of it, with interest." It was exactly what Detective Santos had predicted. The scammer would promise to meet in person to regain the victim's trust, then create a new emergency that prevented the meeting. "Where would you like to meet?" Grace asked. "How about that little cafe you mentioned? The one where you have lunch with Jennifer? I'll be there Thursday at noon." Grace felt a flicker of hope despite everything. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe David was real after all. But Detective Santos had prepared for this possibility. "If he actually shows up, it won't be the man from the photos," she'd warned. More likely, he'll call with an excuse at the last minute. Thursday morning arrived, gray and drizzly. Grace dressed carefully, choosing a blue sweater that David had once complimented during their phone calls. Jennifer insisted on accompanying her to the cafe along with Detective Santos and a technical team who would record any calls. At 11:45 a.m., Grace's phone rang. "Darling, I'm heartbroken," David's voice began, sounding distressed. "I'm at the airport, but there's been a terrible mix-up with my flight. The airline is saying my ticket was never confirmed properly. I need to purchase a new ticket immediately, but my credit card is being declined because of all the overseas activity." Grace's heart sank. Even knowing it was likely a scam, part of her had hoped David would actually appear. "How much do you need for the ticket?" she heard herself ask. "Only $2,000. I know it seems like more money, but Grace, I have $45,000 in cash with mere money, plus the interest I promised. I just need help getting home to you." Jennifer shook her head frantically, but Grace was curious now. She wanted to see how far the scammer would go. "David, I've sent you so much money already. I'm starting to wonder if you're really who you say you are." "Grace, how can you say that? After everything we've shared? I know your daughter has poisoned your mind against me, but darling, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." The words that had once filled her with joy now sounded hollow and manipulative. Grace made her decision. "If you really love me, David, you'll understand why I can't send any more money. Find another way to get home." There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice had turned cold. "After everything I've meant to you? After all the promises we've made to each other? Fine, Grace. But don't expect me to forgive this betrayal easily." The line went dead. Grace stared at her phone, feeling both relieved and devastated. Detective Santos nodded approvingly. "That was exactly the right response. You've probably prevented him from taking any more of your money." The investigation continued for several months. Detective Santos worked with federal agents who specialized in international fraud, tracing the wire transfers through multiple banks and countries. They identified at least 12 other victims and eventually coordinated with law enforcement in Nigeria to arrest Marcus Webb, the 34-year-old man behind the David persona. Grace recovered about $20,000 of the $38,000 she'd lost, not everything, but enough to stabilize her finances. More importantly, she began to rebuild her relationship with Jennifer and found a new purpose, volunteering with organizations that educated seniors about online scams. The most important thing to remember, Grace would tell audiences at senior centers, is that real love doesn't require wire transfers. Anyone who asks you to send money to prove your feelings is not someone who deserves your heart. 6 months after Marcus Webb's arrest, Grace received news of his conviction at years in prison and ordered restitution to all victims. She felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. That evening, as Grace sat in her garden with a cup of tea, she reflected on the lessons of the past year. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to value her daughter's protective love, and to understand that true companionship couldn't be built on deception. Her phone rang. Jennifer, calling for their nightly check-in. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Grace smiled, watching the sunset paint her roses in shades of gold. "I'm feeling grateful. Grateful for a daughter who fought for me, grateful for justice, and grateful that I still have the capacity to trust just more wisely this time." She had also quietly rejoined Silver Connections, but this time with Jennifer's help in setting up safety protocols. A week later, Grace had coffee with Harold, a retired teacher who lived in her neighborhood. They'd met at the library in person, with no mysterious emergencies or requests for money. "The wonderful thing about meeting someone my age," Harold said with a gentle smile, "is that we both know life is too short for games." Grace laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I couldn't agree more." As they walked through the park after coffee, Grace realized she'd learned something valuable from her experience with Marcus Webb. She'd discovered she was stronger than she'd thought, that she deserved genuine love, and that she had people in her life who would always fight to protect her. The man who had tried to steal her savings had failed to steal something much more important: her hope for the future and her faith in the power of real love. "Thank you for watching," Grace whispered to herself, thinking of all the other lonely hearts who might need to hear her story. Sometimes our biggest betrayals teach us our most important lessons about trust.